question or comment to Khaleel. Khaleel, I'm so filled with admiration for what you did. I don't know what your background is. They just called you a carpenter. And yet you put so much of your life on hold. And I don't know who provided the materials that you put together in those tiny shelters. Maybe you're a multimillionaire and I don't know it. But in any event, it's not really a question. Unless, would you please like to move to Vancouver and help us here?
I don't know. I don't think so. but there was a GoFundMe to raise money to build the tiny shelters, and I guess initially probably raised 2,000 or 3,000 over a few weeks, and yeah, I was able to build a few of them, and I was working out of a 2-car garage, and then someone from CBC came across one of them and said they're going to do a story on it. And then after the story, the GoFundMe exploded, and we raised we raised close to $300,000, and then we were able to just build nonstop and work out of a warehouse, and all these people started coming out that wanted to volunteer and work with me, and yeah, we did that up until we could not. So yeah.
Thank you. Any next questions or comments? I see a hand in the back there.
Okay, my question is also for Khaleel. So, film just finished, in my opinion, maybe not on the most happy of terms. I mean, a lot of progress was made and a lot of great things came out of this whole situation. But my question is, what now?
At least for me, for the last 2 years, I guess I've been working with a team of, I guess, architects, engineers, and yeah, just awesome people to build a tiny home community in Toronto. And we're sort of following the lead of another project that has already been in existence for about 4 years called the Better Tent City in Kitchener. And they just have tiny homes all over this property and a big community center with showers, laundry, and washrooms and a big kitchen. And it works. It really works for folks. And there's a real sense of community there, and we're trying to create something like that in Toronto, and I think we're going to find out pretty soon if we're going to be able to do that or not. And we're really taking the approach of working with the city to do this and not just doing it illegally, because that did not work out the first time. So yeah, that's what I'm working on now. We're called 2 Steps Home.
Thank you. Just to check for other hands, I do want to just ask for the other panelists in terms of your impressions when you watched it. Was there things that struck you, or as the last person noted, it didn't end on a good note. It ended with decamping the parks. So just curious what your impressions were after watching the film. And you can raise your hands and I'll note questions if you have any.
So I guess I'll start my response to that. I didn't watch the film again this time around because I did watch it before and it was really hard for me to watch it. So I just felt like emotionally it was really hard for me to kind of go through that again. So yeah, I guess just like all the things that you probably experienced watching it, that it's really difficult, like it's inspiring, and then just like the hardship and the heartbreak and going through that, and then kind of leaving on that down note. And so much of that is what we experience here in Vancouver, and we've gone through, and some of you might have been following what's been happening with Crowd Park Tent City and Stop the Sweeps, and so many similarities in there. I guess some of the things that I take from it, one is just do it. Like, don't wait around. Like, now, maybe when you get to a certain point, you can, work in conjunction with some of the decision makers and lawmakers, but at this point I feel like just do it. Like, you just have to, like, you can't wait around. Like, you just have to kind of get things done and do your own organizing. I just learned a new term from Khaleel as we were talking outside about unorganized township, which I really like. I'm going to start using, because I just really like the idea of just do something. And one of the things that we always talk about is we don't want to perpetuate this model of housing where we're just focused on like the housing, like the structure and the box that people go in, and we're not thinking about what happens when you go in there. There's so much housing that's out there that doesn't always work with people. And so part of me doing this work over a number of years and working with a lot of people over those years is seeing like some housing is successful and some is less successful. So it's like, what does it actually look like? And that's why I think the unorganized township idea and like just do it is about, you know, kind of just making your own community and using some of those models that we have seen working in community rather than going with these really kind of structured things that are just about the housing and then bringing in the management company or bringing in the security company or bringing in the housing agency or all of those things that maybe are not always working for people. And that's why we see these cycles continuing. So that's I guess that's part of how I responded. Like, this is a really hard story, seeing this over and over, the same struggles and the same things happening, and just the same conclusions more and more being reinforced.
Thank you. And just want to offer for Drew, there's a mic here, and Alexandra.
This one works? Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm Drew. I stayed at the park. I went from shelter system a few years ago to the end of Strathcona, and from Strathcona, at the end of that, we went to Crab Park. And I mean, and I'm housed now, unhappily, excuse me, in one of the best options there are, because it's the same problems. I'm not saying every single one, but I'll say for the majority, unfortunately. And it's, I mean, I worked in the service industry professionally in White Spot 10 years, the Hyatt 5 years, high-end service, SFU, Diamond Alumni Center, these kind of things. And I don't know if I'm privileged to have professionalism in my background, but I see the lack of it completely. We just came from the park where they're harassing them again with a 3 times a day they're coming in to get information from the campers, and we were trying to tell them, do you realize how harassing that is? You know what I mean? Just that. I had how many days ago was it now? I had my neighbor 2 doors down from me convinced the security that a girl's ODing in my room so they could get their kid back. I wake up to them at the side of my bed. They don't seem to see anything's wrong with that. I say, that's illegal. This is the 10th time in a year you've been in my room illegally. And it's not just about me. There's so many quiet people out there that are not saying this, and worse. This stuff you read in the news is 10% probably of what really goes on, and the dirtiest is not going to be told. I'm sorry to say, and it's unfathomable, some of the stuff. Anyways, back to like this stuff is related to the movie, and what happened and what I said to Khaleel to you also before, like, you know, classic, you know, you get commended for something at first, and then backlash. I mean, I don't know how ubiquitous that story is in working with, working outside of governments, getting seen. And, you know, how do you avoid crown land or private land, you know? And that's kind of what set us where we are, you know? And then she's saying, it's not just putting someone in a box. I have concrete walls, and we did a Zoom thing in my apartment there, and I prove it. I can yell, help, like louder than that, and no one's coming. At the same time, like, in a way, like, you don't want to have paper-thin walls, but at the tent city or something, where behind tents, it's not always most comfortable. But you see that neighbor that owes you $2 or whatever, you're going to talk about it. At my place, the girl's 3 doors down, I might not see her for months. You know, it's a strange conundrum of feelings. You know, I don't know what the best is, but I'll tell you, like, the involvement, the engagement by many of these agencies, I've heard there's some good ones, but it's lacking the vicarious element or like empathy, I think. And yeah, I hope I didn't go too much far from the movie, but I think that, like, you know, it needs to have care. You know what I mean? Like, and I think working with the government, if there's that care involved, then, you know, we might have some answers. I don't think we need to work with the government, but, you know, we need to care for the people. These people, like she says, we got to do something now. The number of people, you know, we're losing. You know, right now, Oxfam does the report. Every 4 seconds, someone dies to the inequalities we have on Earth. You know, like fine monetary, etc. And it's not slowing down. I just have to say those things.
Thanks, Drew. No, and we do have a question down here, but Alexandra, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, maybe building on what Drew said, that these are choices that governments are making. So we saw lots of examples of this in the film itself, but there are many other governments across the world that make different choices and house people and don't have huge unhoused populations outside. So this is not like an intractable problem. This is something that can be fixed and should be fixed. And the responses, I think, that we saw from city officials in Toronto, those happen here, those happen in so many municipalities, and holding them to account and reminding them that, you know, there are different options that are available, I think is really crucial.
Like, I just want to say, I forget what I was going to say at first, but it's just like the accountability. It doesn't seem like it's there. You know, like we had the federal homelessness advocate come to meet us, a newly appointed position, about a year ago now or so. And I had to ask her 3 questions, like, who's your pay, what's your bias, and why was the federal budget for housing $0 last year when we have a crisis?
Wow.
And nobody seems to report on that kind of stuff. It's there. I think those people need to be reprimanded of some sort. That's my opinion on it. It contributes to the problem. I lived in Denmark for 10 years. It's illegal to be homeless there. I don't know if it's actually a law, but we speak about it. I lived there for 10 years, and it's one of the most ideal countries to live in. When you're on welfare or whatever there, you still can go out to Pizza Hut. You know what I mean? It makes sense. And most of the governments in Scotland and other countries are relating that cash flow in the public sector goes back to itself. I think that $5.50 a month I get, I mean, I can't afford groceries. I can't afford much.
Yeah.
And it doesn't match what you need. Yeah.
Definitely. And there's seems like the wrong priorities and no consequences. So we did have a question here, and just checking for hands if there are other comments or questions. We have one here, and then I got one in the back.
Oh, God. Sorry. Anyway, Khaleel, that was a great movie. Good for you. You know, keep up the good work. Years ago, I'm a public servant, or was a public servant, ha ha ha. And I remember once saying to someone the cliche that you would hear at meetings of government officials, that some people don't want to go into a shelter, they prefer being outside. And an older lady said to me, wait a second, are you actually saying that people would turn down the opportunity to have a bed to sleep in at night? That really stuck with me. We live in a city in Vancouver where 95% of the people who live here, according to their income, are not able to purchase a home in Vancouver, let alone rent. And I go down to the downtown east side a lot. Last year, there was all the tents were everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. We used to have a center-left city government. We don't anymore. And this year, there doesn't seem to be many people, many tents on the streets. And people I know who own condos in the area say, well, things have really improved with the new city council. We don't have the people on the streets anymore. They must be getting housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess I would like to know from somebody who works for the city or might be a civil servant or have some knowledge, where did all those people in the tents go? Were they just shoved into Burnaby or Surrey? I mean, I can't see how the situation has improved. So if somebody could comment.
Well, I mean, on the walk here, I guess I saw someone sleeping in an alley. I saw another person sleeping in the doorway of a business that was closed. So I don't think anyone's, they might not have tents, but they're here. So that's my impression.
Those tents got removed on the street sweep the day of the first tourism cruise ships came in, that Thursday. Yeah, it's not a coincidence. What happened? What was the number last year? There was, I think, 800 people of this housing flux, and then got kicked out of housing. 800 people got kicked out of housing for various reasons. 500 unaccounted for.
I think I think maybe you're saying that there's a lot of housing that's closing, as well as there's always the PR about a new shelter opening or a new housing opening, but there's never really the net numbers, which is there's temporary housing that's closing. There's hotels that were opened after Oppenheimer that have closed like a year ago. There's Winter's Hotel burnt down. There's like all the net losses as well. So the number of new places that are opening, like shelters you're referring to, is a lot smaller than is perpetuated in the media or like all these news releases. People are dying too. Like there's an overdose crisis, there's an opioid crisis. So I hate to say it, but there's a lot of loss. The numbers are changing, and people talk about that a lot in the community about how, like, someone just said yesterday that she used to walk down the street on welfare day and you couldn't even like see your feet on the sidewalk, and now it's like she's waiting for the tumbleweeds to come through, and that's because of the opioid crisis. So that's changing things too. But I know when people, there's all those myths, and like the theme of this series is erasure. So there's all these myths, like why do people not go to shelters? It's because they don't want to. Like there's so many myths and narratives that people tell about, so-and-so doesn't want housing. Well, they want good housing. They want housing they can live in. They want housing where their friends are not kicked out. They want housing where they can use with a friend or their grandkids can visit. They don't not want housing. That doesn't mean you don't want housing. It's you don't want that housing. You don't want bad housing. You want something that's going to be best for yourself and be able to make those choices. I know with Crab Park, and I've been through these evictions a number of times now. We've seen them. I think it's like 10 in 5 years or something like that. But when this park board issued 2 orders before the injunction attempt and before Crab Park became legal, the city issued 2 orders. The second time, they actually, BC Housing was giving people taxi chits with an open-ended destination, because it's a taxi chit to nowhere. And people were going to bushes and train tracks and alleys, like literally, and a bridge that stopped in the middle of the Fraser River. That's where people were going to go live. So that's where people went after Hastings. They went nowhere.
And the World Cup coming up isn't a big influence on that stuff, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. And we do have a question close to the front here for the other mic. You can put your hand up higher so they can see. Thank you. And then there was a question at the back and a question here. I'm just keeping an eye on hands as well. Okay, and we got a question over here. All right, you get a question. You get a question. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this is kind of for anyone that might have like an answer that comes to mind, but how do we kind of hold on to hope while knowing that idea that like we can't help everyone?
I don't know. I guess, yeah, I guess, and it's, in my mind, to me, it seems like the fact that ultimately hoping that most people are reasonable. And it's easy to look at yourself and think, I am a reasonable person. It's like, I will do the most reasonable things I can. It's like, but you make mistakes. And like, my hope is that, this is just a terrible mistake that keeps happening. But ultimately that there are reasonable people that you can work with to make change. And so that's where I keep my hope. And I feel like that's sort of, like the conversations around homelessness are also changing, at least where I've been talking and like interacting and just seeing this change. It's like in 2000 in Toronto, there's a massive tent city under a bridge, and it was cleared, and there were no articles about it. There wasn't much of a conversation about it. It's like, oh yeah, they shouldn't be there. Great, they're gone. Amazing. But that same thing happening now, and like what happened in the documentary, I feel like this is a changing conversation. And you can't just throw money at police to go into parks and move people around, because that's not a solution. And I feel like people are getting very frustrated with seeing how ineffective the decisions that are being made are. And it's like, right, like this isn't a solution. It's like, and it's becoming a collective understanding that this isn't a solution. And I have a lot of hope in the reasonableness in people to see that, and just to be, selfish. It's like, right, like I talk to some people that are just like, oh, like I hate encampments. I want them away from my business, away from my house. And it's like, right, we're on the same page, actually. Like we're kind of like, we're on this, like no one wants to be in an encampment. It's not necessarily ideal. They want to be in a situation that works for them. And no one wants to be in an encampment. So how do we do this? How do we do that together? And it's like, if you frame the conversation in that way with someone that's aggressively against you, it seems to really cool them right down. They're like, oh, I guess I've never thought about something that makes sense. Oh shit. It's like, maybe we should talk a little now. And that gives me a lot of hope as well. And I've had a few conversations with people that are like, angry coming to a screening, and I'm talking to them, they're like pissed, and they're like, oh, you seem to care so much about the rights of people that are violating my rights, and it's like, I can't walk my dog anymore. It's like, all right, so what should we do? And that, it's like there's a lot of hope in knowing that there are reasonable people. You're surrounded by reasonable people, and trusting that they can be reasonable, that, you can come to solutions, and it's like just a matter of like, not sharing the same understanding, but that is possible. So yeah, that's my feeling.
Alexandra, do you want to share anything about what might give us hope?
Yeah, I mean, I think the people on stage give me a lot of hope. The fact that we're watching this film gives me a lot of hope. On the ground, there's stuff going on, especially in the legal sphere. There's more legal cases. There's more municipalities that are trying different options, that are allowing encampments, regulating them, but doing so in a more humane way. There's legislation that's being, so there's signs, but I think the thing is we can't stop fighting for it and bringing it to attention and demanding accountability. Like I think the hope has to be seen in the distance, and the action needs to happen because we can't get complacent.
Right, thank you. Fiona, Drew?
I guess for me, one of the things I noticed was that in 2018 or 19, when the tent city at Oppenheimer Park was being evicted, and there were BC Housing and the Park Board and the city came together to offer housing for people, and they kept putting up these press releases and saying that people had gone into safe, secure housing or safe, dignified housing, and they're talking about SROs. And they were like, that was just being written and put into the media. It was just being printed verbatim. And now, years later, everyone knows that that is not safe, dignified, secure housing. Like, that's commonplace knowledge. It's mainstream knowledge. Everybody knows. Everyone knows about the Winters Hotel. Everyone knows about SROs. Even David Eby is like acknowledging in like public statements and national statements that SROs are not the greatest, not the best housing. So there has been a change, and that's not the be all end all in some of this work that we're doing. But I've seen in just the time that I've been involved in this that there has been a shift, and so I can see that might happen with other things too. And so if that, it's sort of like an awareness or attitude change, and so if that can change for one thing, then I can see it changing for other things. So I guess it's that. And then I guess for me, it's also just like the day-to-day, like there's the frustration, like Drew was saying this morning, and this on the ground, there's like in the minutiae, there's like all these difficult challenges and fights, but with the rangers and all these like little things that just happen, challenges that happen every day. But in the big picture, you can see that there are the legal cases and some things that are changing. Shouldn't be all about the courts and the colonial system and everything. And then the other thing is just sort of the individual residents and people that I work with, and knowing that we've had this community for almost 3 years, and there's no staff, and it's just the people that live there and the
work your ass off.
that are the staff that are doing all these things. That if it was a shelter, it would be like how many millions and how many number of staff you would have for that number of people to do the same things that are being done by people who are actually homeless themselves. So I find that very hopeful.
Me, I find hope. She got me housed. That's hope. I didn't come from. I didn't really come from like that world. I've always worked all my life, and I didn't know much about retirement or. I mean, I went on welfare because I broke my leg, but I didn't know what you do if you don't got nothing. I think you just go figure it out. That's what I was told. But I've now recently seen this world and stuff like that. I mean, when I left a shelter for the camp, let's remember that, in this talk about shelters and stuff. The shelter was a quite good place at first, until a year and a half later when, the Filipino ladies that wear their scrubs there and do their job really well are later on making orders with the car guys to get Burberry scarves at night. Good, and things change a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, they've taken all my stuff, I preferred to leave that place, even though it was fairly somewhat clean and stuff like that. I went online and read about the place and got the dirt on it and stuff like that. But I don't know, like when I was at the park after the shelter, and we had a sacred fire with the legal observers, a lot of them the natives that take care of the sacred fire. And I come out of my tent one day, and there's almost a brawl going on where these people that don't even know me really are standing up for us because we don't have housing, and we're fair enough, harmless at the time. They're standing there to support us. I don't otherwise know these people. I was moved. I mean, it was like, that gave me hope. I mean, strangers helping strangers is probably what the change we need. I find that like there's a lot of like inferior, superior quality that we kind of create in our society, and I've been part of at times. And I say like it's like when you kick someone when they're down, and I think it starts when we take pleasure in like others' demise, or something like that. And I think that's kind of the problem that starts the split. And then we need to see each other more at the same angle or same plateau or something like that. And even if you're helping out someone that has more than you or something like that, it shouldn't be thought through so much. It needs to be immediate action for people to get help. And a lot of it's very logical. I lose a lot of hope sometimes with structure and system and stuff like that. But you guys coming here, interested, is hope. Passing the word after this is hope. Seeing him here is hope. People helping each other is hope. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go to the next question. At the top of the stairs. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The scene with the city hall meeting, I just related to that so much, that long period of time, so many politicians talking, so little action, and then Khaleel, when you take action, there's this response of not action like that. My question is to the entire panel, what do you think is the thing that we need to change, the action that we can take to change in order to make this kind of an opportunity happen? Do we need new policy? Do we need education? Do we need people's minds to change? What is it that you see that could change, that could make this happen?
Great. Does anyone feel comfortable starting?
I'd like to start with saying that we have like social housing implemented, like for sure. Like there's all this free market housing going up around here. None of it has social housing in it. Why isn't it mandated? Start with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, from my perspective, I wouldn't build the tiny shelters again. I guess I wouldn't do that exact thing again. I would, ideally do something more substantial that, works better for folks. But it's interesting. It's like, this is like, right, we're going to, or at least I did something to help some people for some period of time. But ultimately, it's like, how many people are becoming unhoused? How many people are going to be unhoused that have never been unhoused in their lives before this year? And why is that number going up? And we always say, oh, there's a housing crisis. That's why. It's like, it's not an earthquake or a hurricane or something that just suddenly happened. There's policies that have been in place for years that have created the situation, and there has to be a change. So at least in Ontario, it's like we don't have rent control on anything built after 2018. So if you're a landlord in Ontario and you own a building, you can increase your rent by whatever you want if it's built after 2018. And as soon as it's made vacant, there's also no rent control on vacant units. And yeah, so that's a massive problem that's contributing directly to people becoming unhoused that is not changing. So there's a few very specific things that can change that would immediately reduce how many people are becoming unhoused that are not changing. I'm not too familiar with what's happening in Vancouver, but Canada-wide in like 1994, the federal government stopped building affordable housing. That was something that they did up until 1994. And they completely stopped for 20 years, and now they're suddenly making these big plans we're reinvesting in affordable housing. And it's like, wow, what a great PR campaign. That sounds so good. It's like, what happened in 1994?
They're supposed to have like 200,000 houses built a year or something like that. Yeah.
I don't know. And it's like, and it's interesting, at least in Toronto, you see so many things being built, and it's like, it doesn't make sense that there is so much being built, but it is unreachable. That is, it's not, people aren't going to be able to keep those places. And that, like the policies that create that situation need to change. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And Fiona or Alexandra?
I think I'd say specifically to your question that it's kind of everything at once. And I wouldn't, if I was to put one before the other, I think it's kind of, it's the peer pressure. It's not the policy. It's not like, because we've done all those things like sitting at the table with like the head of the general manager and going to the meetings and the going to the city hall and doing the talks and the presentations and all those things. And it's not, those are not bad things. And some things can be accomplished that way. But I think it's like changing the peer pressure that, I know in Seattle, Kashama Swand, who is on the city council, she talks about how it's about kind of like a critical mass kind of thing. We were talking about that earlier too, that if it can't be about the politicians just like individually wanting to be like, oh yeah, I should like make sure the Amazon employee doesn't get fired, or I should like go against Jeff Bezos. It's like they're not individually going to think that, but if you make it politically astute for them to do that because they know they're not going to get voted in because hundreds of thousands of people believe differently. So it's that peer pressure, it's the outside pressure that's going to go to the political arena, the policy and the political pressure. So just kind of like renormalizing about, that a lot of people now do think that street sweeps are wrong and that people shouldn't have their tent thrown away. I think that is changing, and I think more of that will then drive the policy and the politics.
Honestly, I think the federal government has to be seen as responsible for housing. Like right now, they point the fingers at every other government and say that it's not their job to deal with it. I think we need to do in Canada like we did with healthcare and say there's universal healthcare, there should be universal housing. We need, 6 million homes now. They cannot be built by the private sector for middle income people. People just can't afford those homes. So we need that now. I think that's the only way to really address the issue. I think Khaleel is right. It's like you can't have the federal government stepping back and saying that they're not going to be involved anymore. It doesn't work. We have this crisis, and it was obvious that it was going to happen.
Thank you. So I know there were some hands up, and I'm going to go to you next. And then I saw some over this way. So I'm going to have the mic runner come down to this hand because they were first, and then we'll go up to you, and we'll show some love to this side of the room. And then there's another hand there. Great. Okay.
Hi, Khaleel. This question, well, it's not really a question as much as a comment. You know that federal elections coming up in city and everything, would you consider running? Because you're the only one that's proven to me, as far as I'm concerned, that knows the issue, compassion, and do something. Completely proactive. I don't need a politician sitting up in a tower and mouth words or promise something that is outrageous lie. It's been proven over and over again. What they promise is like, are you kidding me? After the fact. So we need you to be sitting, just Ministry of Housing here in BC or Toronto. I'll move to Toronto just to vote for you. I would promise, because you're the only one, just to paraphrase that lady's word, ascend and get down dirty and do something for the people.
You got a campaign manager over here.
Trust me, I've done enough of that for free, and I know what I can do. I have. Now, just a quick comment is that I know that our city of Vancouver had spent money, had sent people to Holland to study harm reduction in drugs. And what they found was it was substantially cheaper, safer, whatever, to build a clinic for people who need to use drugs in a safe environment. So I'm just wondering, has any level of our government done any harm reduction number crunching on how much it would cost any province, any municipality to look after a homeless person, say in emergency, in drug overdose, in anything else. I can bet you that the numbers that would come back would be a lot less if they have affordable housing, just like reduction of drugs use. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it to Khaleel, and if anyone else has anything on that, and then we've got a couple more questions. So.
In terms of I guess how much it costs for people to, I don't know specifically. I know that the numbers have been crunched by someone. I just don't know those numbers, but it is expensive. In terms of what's happening in Toronto, they have a shelter hotel program that's housing 2,300 people between 17 hotels, and they're paying about $250 every single night for every single person, and that's adding up to be a couple $100 million a year. And for that same amount of money, you could just house them. You can just house these people. It's ended up being like $100,000 per person. So it's insane. It's insane, the decisions that are being made that are not long-term reasonable things to be doing. I would never run. I'll say that. I couldn't do that. I would not do that.
I know that like when I stayed at a shelter, the numbers were something like $156 or $75,000 a year per bed filled, plus 15 to somewhat extra thousand because it was a low barrier shelter. It's a community builder shelter I stayed at. They make laws in the city. It's called 4CS, where a profit and a nonprofit company come together and max their tax income at 40%. They made that law. Community builders, which have many subsidiary companies around underneath that and stuff like that. So 4 million, and they I think the number max in the city is 40 beds to a shelter. I'm not sure if it's a law, but that's the general number. And they're trying this new thing with cubicles, kind of like office thing, whatever, to give people a freedom. But there's so much control in there. They own the pest control, the junk removal company. They own the secondhand store where they steal and sell your shit. Sorry, excuse me. But it is true. These are true things. I mean, you could see it's all whitewashed, right? They make the laws. We see the bylaws being made by the Parks Department as we're fighting them. No joke, and if, all this kind of stuff, change it. I mean, you almost have to go back to democracy the Greek way, where we all are the government and stuff like that. So not someone that's just, look at the Rankin versus Gordon Campbell back in whatever that was, 86, and you could see social housing wasn't important. What did Gordon Campbell go on to do? Get in with the slick, greasy hands and drunk drive in Hawaii and get knighted in England. I mean, sorry.
Yeah, 40 years of disinvestment and deregulation is getting us to this problem.
But there's a lot of this, I watched Chomsky too much lately, but I mean, it's not, we're driven by dollars, especially here on the West Coast. And probably also on the East Coast. I just know that out here, you see the decisions made, even like some things that seem practical and logical for the people, what a city and a society is meant for, correct? For the better and the best interest of the people that live in it. And I think that's my argument to the authority.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to go, I think we have 2 more questions. Yes, please.
Awesome. Is this on? Okay, perfect. This was a very insightful piece, and seeing it from your perspective, Khaleel, it was, because I remember this being on the news, following it in a more passive way, but seeing this from your perspective was very insightful. So this was incredible. And I guess my question is for you. Toronto is an incredibly huge city. It's a diverse city. It's a huge city. And they say it's like a city of cities within it. So when you started building the tiny shelters, how did you decide where to place them? What factors were kind of influential, or what did you sort of look at when it came to choosing locations to place your tiny shelters? And I guess a more general question for the group could be, how can policymakers, how can people who target policies towards, how can they also, what frameworks could be used to sort of assess it when you have a city as big as Toronto? Where is it most important to target when it's a citywide problem?
For me, the only tiny shelter I really chose where it was going to go was the very first one. Every single one after that was just where people were already living. So it was just, And at first, I guess I was just going up to people's tents and just knocking on their tent and being like, hey, like, I'm building these things. Would you want one? And yeah, and then I would come the next day and just drop it off. And then when that became too much, or when we were building quite a bit, I was working with a group called the Encampment Support Network in Toronto. And they were in all these different encampments and like helping people out and bringing them things that they needed. And I connected with them just to find out, like, right. And that was kind of difficult when it's like I'm building 3 a day with these people and there's so many more people that could use them. And it's like, how do you find out? How do you figure out where the hell these are going? You know, I guess I really relied on them to know who was in a very difficult situation. And it's like, this person might not make it tonight. Can you please come and drop it there? And yeah, I forget the other question.
I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on sort of policies to meet the scale of the problem that we're facing, or things that might address things at such a massive level.
Rent geared to income housing, lots of that, I think. And like you were saying, other cities have, you know, figured out a way to make housing much more affordable, where you're not having people becoming unhoused. And I think the easiest way to help people that are becoming unhoused, it's like, you know, is for people to never become unhoused in the first place. That's like the best possible outcome. It's like, you know, because I guess you know, as soon as, and it's like, I don't know, I've had a few conversations with some folks where, like, you know, they don't notice what's happening until suddenly they're just in the spot, and it's like, oh, I'll be here for maybe a week and then things will work out. Or it's like, and then weeks and then months and then years, and suddenly, oh, I guess I'm unhoused, I guess I'm homeless. And it's like, right. And, you know, there's so many experiences that come along with that are very difficult. And yeah.
I'll also turn it to Alexandra maybe to touch on this, and I think we're actually at time. So,
thank you. One thing that just makes me so mad, you know, whenever I think about it, is that on the data side, we actually don't collect data on the number of unhoused people. There's some cities that do homeless counts, but there's no Canada-wide systemic counting or understanding of the depth of the problem. And I think that's very deliberate. I think it's so that governments don't have to fix it. The countries that have decided that it's a priority to have a real right to housing with teeth, they figure out what the problem is so that they can try to fix it. And I think I think your question's a great question, because the truth is we don't really know. People are so scared and so at risk. Their tents and their belongings put them at risk. So we actually don't even, like, I've talked to people who actually create caves underground in order to survive and sleep, or hide out in parks behind the scenes. You know, we don't know how massive this problem is. And if we think it's just the number of people who are living in parks and on streets, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So I think demanding that our governments be accountable has to include figuring out how many people need housing. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And I think it really helps to wrap this up on thinking about the erasure of the problem and bringing it back to that as one of the things that's, you know, driving the policies right now is, you know, we don't want to see it, we don't want to talk about it. And so I think this is really important. I know we had more questions out there. We unfortunately don't have time. I want to respect the schedule. I know. But I do want to say thank you again to Alexandra, Fiona, Khaleel, and Drew. Thank you for spending your time here with us tonight. Thank you to all of you for being here.